Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Love and Cherish podcast with me, Laura Howe. Today, I have the greatest of privileges of being joined by the author, activist, and educator, Warren Farrell. Welcome, Warren.
Thank you. I'm really looking forward to sharing our thoughts together.
I should say my husband and I found Warren in 2019, very quickly after the release of his book, The Boy Crisis. We came to you as a result of Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson obviously had you on his great podcast and interviewed you on the subject of the book. And we had a 4-year-old, I believe, at the time, and we were quite eagerly making our way through books about child rearing and particularly how best to raise boys. And your book, of course, was hugely influential. I think I've said this to you before. It was it played a massive role in the decisions that we made, not only on how best to raise Charlie, but also in terms of adding weight to, I guess, what I'm sure most couples go through when they're raising children, which are times when perhaps you question whether it's best to continue with the marriage and with the relationship, with everything being as sometimes dreadful and difficult as it can be. And yes, it was very much your influential work was part of keeping us actually together.
May I ask you, was there any part of the book that you feel was particularly helpful to helping you understand each other and keeping you together?
Well, I spoke to Russell earlier, and he was saying that he found your book so helpful because he felt as a father that no one was saying what you have been saying, and he found it. He felt that the sort of the feeling of the era, and perhaps that still continues today, is that fathers are replaceable or dispensable. And
Mhm.
you were so influential for him in that you convinced him. I think this is the most important thing, that you
Mhm.
convinced him that he had deep and great value as a father, and that it was important that he stuck around to do what he could do best. And I do
Yeah.
wonder, and I've not spoken to him directly about this. I'll talk to him about it afterwards. But I wonder if, because of the problems we were having as a couple at the time, if he had not read your book, if he had not been helped to understand his value, that might have that what am I trying to say? That I wonder if that was another reason to stay, because you spoke to the heart of him,
Yeah. Yeah.
the father's heart, or himself, as I'm not wording it very well, but I do wonder if there's some real profound truth to that we really do have you to thank in some ways, because you steadied us.
I am so happy to hear that. You made my day because, I'm at a point now in my life, I'm in my 80s and I don't need to work, financially. And so, but, and the thing that motivates me is being able to, especially with the Role Mate to Soulmate book and the work I've been doing in the relationship area, just seeing couples go from being on the verge of divorce, to feeling not only much better about their partner, but also having a method to continue going back to being able to hear their partner's most challenging feelings and thoughts in the relationship. That's sort of inspires me, and so thank you for
Oh,
that.
it's a pleasure, and that's perhaps the perfect segue into your next book. So I wondered, would you be happy perhaps to start with by perhaps explaining the basic premise of role mate to soulmate, and then we could perhaps go onto the criticism and defensiveness issue.
Absolutely. My whole process on this started when I wrote a book earlier in my life called Why Men Are the Way They Are. And I would do workshops at various venues, retreat centers, on that. And I was doing one at Esalen, which is in Big Sur in California. and it's a well-known retreat center. And after I and I had and it was on Why Men Are the Way They Are, but I had one segment out of five on couples communication. But I was beginning to read people like Gottman and so on, and everybody was saying that we all agreed that we shouldn't be defensive in response to criticism, and that would had 100% agreement in the workshop. But then when people went home and the first criticism appeared, that wisdom disappeared.
Indeed.
We were defensive. And so I said, okay, it was clear here that something had to be created. And I was beginning to develop in my mind's eye a whole workshop around this and other things that I felt would keep marriages together, that other relationship therapists were suggesting, but they weren't actually making it happen in practice in back home when the conflicts were occurring. And so I sort of set myself the challenge to see if I could figure out an answer to that. And so somebody, this was back in the day of letters when people, if for people who are younger, this was when something came through a mail and it was addressed to you and it wasn't from a company asking you for something. That was called a letter.
That's so funny that you know that you need to explain that. I've forgotten that you'd need to explain that because I was there.
I'm being a little bit tongue in cheek, of
It's
course,
good.
but so so I get this letter and it says, that segment, which was then 1/5 of the workshop on couples communication, was so powerful for me that I'm now using it in my family business. And I thought that's really nice. But then I looked at the bottom and it was signed by the CEO of Walmart.
Wow.
And so here's the largest family business in the world, and they're beginning to see value to this. So I'm saying, okay, I really need to make a whole workshop out of this. And this was about 32 years ago. And so, my goal then was finding out why it was so difficult for people to handle personal criticism. And I realized that historically speaking, biologically speaking, when you heard criticism, it was a potential enemy. And it really made sense for survival to get up defenses or to even kill the enemy before the enemy killed you. And that's sort of what we do.
Yeah,
But I realized, of course, that was functional for survival, but it's just dysfunctional for love. But that also made it really apparent that this is what if I were able to get couples to do this, that this would be an evolutionary shift from being biologically naturally defensive to changing temporarily that attitude toward a criticism, where ideally I thought if I could get people to associate criticism as it was being given with an opportunity to be more deeply loved as opposed to wanting to fight back, that was my ideal goal. And so the question was, how could I do that without it being while understanding that it's so biologically unnatural to do that. And so I then began to sort of ask. So I realized that what was missing was that if it's so hard to hear criticism, then we needed to do something like to change the natural mindset that we have before we hear it. So that means preparing ourselves, and the key word is preparing ourselves to hear the criticism by altering our natural biological state of defensiveness. And so I then started to work with the couples. So one of the experiences I did, for example, was to have everybody in the workshop sit back to back with their partner. And so I would say to them, pretend that you are in a relationship and you're with your partner, and your partner's about to drown or about to be killed in a car accident, and you knew with 100% certainty that you could save your partner's life. But you also knew with about 100% certainty that you'd have a 50% risk of dying yourself in the process. Would you do that? And then pretend that children are not part of the equation. That's important. So would you do that? Yes, no, or maybe uncertain. And I told everybody that their partner would never see the answer to that question that they wrote. And so then I had everybody in the workshop crumple up their piece of paper that they were writing on. They were all identical pieces of paper, and all the men would throw the their piece of paper in one corner, the women in another corner, and even gay couples would do, the males with one corner, females in the other corner. And so then, and then I went around and I asked every person to say whether they would be willing to do that. But they were now reading the answers on somebody else's, another man's or another woman's piece of paper. And about 90, a little bit over 90% of the men said they'd be willing to die, to take a 50% risk of dying for their partners, to save their partner's life if they knew that they could do that for sure. And about 82, 83% of the women said they would be willing to do that. And so that was, as long as no children were involved in the equation. And so then the first thing that I had people do before they heard their partner's criticism was to go alter their mindsets and just sit back and say, okay, if I'm willing to die for you, well, the least I can do is listen to you.
Yes,
And it
indeed.
just put it in perspective. And I had a few
Mm,
questions that were less dramatic than die for, like lose an arm or a leg, or
mhm.
but most people were at least willing to lose their ice cream cone for to listen to their partner. And so it was, and so that was just the first of six mindsets that I trained people to do in what I came to call a caring and sharing session. And so the difference between that and active listening teaches you to say, what I heard you say was, and did I distort anything? I didn't miss anything. But the problem with active listening I found was that in addition to being defensive when you're hearing your partner's criticism, that you also are be required by in active listening to repeat the criticism. So it's like double jeopardy. And so the studies show that literally no one did active listening without the presence of a therapist. And so I wanted to be able to have people do this in their own presence. So, first of all, it was available to poor people, not just people who could afford a therapist. And secondly, it was available to anybody at any time. But I had every couple set aside 2 hours a week in which they would appreciate each other at multiple levels of specificity first, then just listen to one concern. But before they listen to that concern, six mindsets like the ones I just mentioned to you, they would they would sort of meditate into those mindsets, and their goal was, and in fact, the necessity was, that they would, before they heard their partner's concern, which they would consider usually a criticism, that they were able to see that the angrier their partner got, the more their partner distorted what they felt was the truth, that rather than being arguing in your own mind's eye with the distorted version of it and wanting to get your own act in order to be able to retaliate, you're totally focused on knowing that if you are listening to your partner's concern, even if you completely disagree with their version of it, and that the more you disagree with their version of it and yet provide a safe environment for that, the more your partner will feel safe and secure, and therefore more loved by you, and therefore more love for you. And that meant that you were able to see that the angrier your partner was, that when you hold out there and you support them to express what their feelings are, that you are going to increase the amount of love they have for you and you have for them, and that they feel from you. And so that then settles a person into knowing, I have the magical ability of making this anger into love.
That's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And when I was listening to your book, and one of the things that you were talking about was that this is something that after practice, like anything, the more you do this, the more, I guess, because you ultimately you're developing neural pathways. I mean, this isn't just an intellectual exercise, is it? Of course, it's physiological.
Yes, and that's a very important thing because the it's so important to read the book, but it's really more important to practice it with your partner. And so to make sure every couple could do that, I have in the Role Mate to Soulmate book a QR code that a person can tap into, and for $97 they can pick up an 8 hour online video version of me doing the course with two other couples, and then and actually practice that version of it with their partner. Every exercise is in there, but it's a lot easier to do when you're doing it in conjunction. You're doing it very much like I do it in the real life course, rather than doing it just by reading and intellectually absorbing it.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think what you're suggesting is, I think a weekly practice, the caring and sharing experience, where people go into this process with an intentionality, or good intentions, and with, I guess it's a discipline, is I think what you're saying.
It is. It's both an art and a
An
discipline.
art
Yes,
and a
and
discipline, indeed.
yes. And it's you're absolutely right. And it's so there's two you there's the subtitle of Role Mate to Soulmate is Seven Secrets for Lifelong Love. But the two most important secrets are the first, well, actually three, the most important one. The first one is knowing how to appreciate each other at multiple levels of specificity. And I'll come back to that in a moment. The second one is the caring and sharing practice, which is the 2 hour practice, which starts with the appreciations and then goes into altering your six mindsets. And then and that takes 2 hours per week. Most of it is appreciation time. And then the rest of it is what I call a conflict, having a conflict-free zone. So once a couple sees that their partner can, with preparation, have a 100% likelihood of really hearing them well and leaving them feeling understood and not defensive, then if a criticism comes up during the week, which it inevitably will if you're together a fair amount, and then you have the ability to visualize that I can respond quickly to this criticism now. My partner says, "Gee, I wish you had put the dishes in the dishwasher rather than left them in the sink," and you respond, but and go and say, "Well, you didn't put the dishes in the dishwasher the other day, and I just did it for you rather than being so petty and bringing it up as an issue, and then before you know it, it's up. Well,
Yeah.
you did that with this, and this, well, we're going at it, and so on, and before you know it, it's so the first step is of the conflict-free zone is once you've had the experience of your partner hearing you non-defensively, you now have the choice. You can either respond to what you perceive as a criticism, why don't you put the dishes into the sink immediately, and that will probably escalate into a conflict. Or if you're upset about it, bring it up during that caring and sharing time, and your partner will have a 100% chance of hearing you well and effectively. And so, what do you do what do you do with the anger inside of you between then and caring and sharing time? I have a series of steps that you can take. One of those is journaling. Take what just happened and write it down in your journal. And when you write it down in your journal, make sure that the first thing you do is write down all the ways that you're right and your partner is 100% wrong. That's what I call the self-righteous stage. And then you go through it in increments, and you get to, well, one thing maybe that my partner said that has some value to it, a little condescension zone, and then a few things, and then you end up writing it from your partner's perspective, as if your partner is writing it. And so there's a number of steps like that to sustain the conflict-free zone until you get to the time for the caring and sharing. And if you do that and you're still upset, I explain a way of moving up the conflict-free zone so it's closer to the time of your upset.
Well, I think it's wonderful, Warren. I mean, I must say this is a sort of self-disclosure here in that we as a couple have worked out that the caring and sharing, we call it check-ins. So we regularly have these check-ins where we go over anything that we're unhappy about and we talk about the relationship in general. So we worked out that that in order to not be just roommates or housemates, or as you say, role mates, that kind of practice produces an emotional marriage, an emotional connection that is sustained and develops trust and bonding that's been quite beautiful. But what I have never heard is the concept of the conflict-free zone. And the minute I read it the other day, I just thought that is just such a good idea, and I'm so guilty of perhaps peppering our relationship with negativity, perhaps in ways that are harmful. And I shouldn't imagine I'm the only man or woman out there doing that. So I love this idea that you've produced or created, where you have these specified times where you do go towards the difficult stuff, but you have these boundaries around that, and that makes you can sort of relax then, can't you, for the rest of the time, and focus on perhaps implementing attitudes of gratitude and warmth and, positivity, knowing that there is going to be that time coming where you can address the things that you also need to address in order to keep the relationship in a good place. Yeah, so what a great idea.
And thank you very much. The one of the things I was mentioning a few minutes ago was the appreciations, and that the appreciations um, are both an art and a discipline also. And so most people will say something like, "Oh, sweetie, that was a nice meal you cooked," and that's and that's appreciated. But it's so much more appreciated if you say something like, "That was a wonderful chicken you cooked. How did you cook the chicken and get the skin so crisp? It was so delicious." And so the more you're specific, the more your partner sort of feels like, wow, he really or she really saw what I did and the value, and that creates a much greater appreciation than just being told thanks for the dinner, and so on. And also what I said, the art and discipline of appreciating, that's a little bit of the discipline of it, of being very specific. But also the art might be something, having fun with it. I have a section in the Role Mate to Soulmate book called "Couples That Play Together Stay Together," and so there's so many ways of playing, even in appreciating. Like um, one of the places I teach is at a place called Esalen and Big Sur, and the road on Big Sur is Highway 1, and it's an extremely curvy and dangerous road, or not extremely so, but it's curvy and could be dangerous if you're not paying attention. And so I suggest to people in the workshop doing something along the lines of putting a ticket on their partner's car. And so then the partner goes to sort of look at the car, and it's like there's a little anxiety. And then she or he picks up the ticket, and the ticket says, "Thanks for driving me to Esalen while I drove you crazy by telling you, oh, be careful here, be careful there," that type of thing. And so the art of that appreciation is that as an appreciation that creates a little bit of difference, a little bit of anxiety, remains in the mind longer than one that doesn't create any. And of course, there can be teasing and playing like that can go too far. So part of learning about each other is learning how much teasing is a positive and how much teasing is a negative, and that type of thing. And so those are, but the appreciation is so important because it's what I call filling the reservoir of love. If you don't feel appreciated by your partner, there's no incentive to do the caring and sharing. Who wants to really, do a 2 hours with somebody and hear their criticism when you don't feel appreciated by them? So the first thing that one needs to do is to learn the art and discipline of appreciating our partners.
Absolutely. Absolutely right. And I guess as you say, that's a discipline too, isn't it? There's an intentionality about that, and that arguably is part of a wisdom, the wisdom of relational health. That ideally along the way you work out as somebody who wants to do well in life, that your relationships don't become great just on their own. You really do need to throw your consciousness at it. You need to become mindful of the relationship and of your spouse and what they enjoy. And complimenting is such a inexpensive, actually quite easy thing to become good at. It's a generosity, isn't it, to notice the things that your partner, the way that your partner is, their character, the things that they do. I mean, all the information is there if we would just slow down and pay attention. And I think that there's a lovely balance between what you're suggesting here, in that if you can be, if through the practice of caring and sharing you can actually manage to address the problems, which is obviously also a vital part, a fundamental part of health, of a relationship being healthy, you develop faith in each other. You develop faith that you can make it through these difficult things. You can fix problems where they arise. And then if you also balance that with these positive behaviors and disciplines, you're massively increasing your chances of success as a couple. And interestingly, I have to say, Warren, a huge amount of the couples that I see, they have almost entirely given up on the process of problem solving as a couple. They find that the defensiveness and reactivity is so dreadful, and the issues that they're bringing seem to my clients to be of so little import to their spouses that they've almost entirely given up, which is just so very sad. So what you're offering here, and what I can see very clearly outlined in your book, is actual solutions to the very real problems that people are facing.
Thank you very much. Yes, one of those things that haunts almost every relationship is the natural propensity to do something that I call self-listening. So your partner is beginning to share what is bothering her or him, and you're thinking about, okay, I have a response to that, and you're listening and developing that response in your mind's eye while your partner is talking. Or even you want to, in a more positive way, you're wanting to say, okay, I want to make sure when I share with my partner what I heard her say or him say, that I remember that. And so you're listening to yourself rehearse or try to remember this partner's point. And so, but whenever you're self-listening like that, your partner is sensing and picking up that you're not completely there for them. And so, even if you're rehearsing in your mind's eye what she or he said, you still are not present. You're not there for just the process of them saying that. And so, built into the practice is after there is if you find yourself doing that, listening to yourself respond. I have the person who's doing that say the word hold, and the word hold means I'm going to I'm not I've just lost it. I started listening to myself rather than listening to you as well as I want to. So let me hold and go back to one of those 6 mindsets that center me, so that I can go back to 100% just listening to you, not worrying about taking notes, not worrying about remembering what you're saying. Just be there for you as you are speaking. And when the partner is doing that, it just leaves that partner feeling so safe. They're not walking on eggshells anymore. They're not sort of sensing that their partner is sitting there, but half listening and half not listening. And that creates this enormous amount of of feelings, and people are sometimes bringing up issues that they've said 100 times before, and they're saying, "Well, I don't want to say this. I've said this 100 times," and I say, "No. If you've said it 100 times, that means two things: A, it's important to you, and B, you've never felt heard, which is why you're repeating it again and again." And so that is what you should bring up.
That's absolutely beautiful, and I guess that's something of a cognitive approach, isn't it? The ability to witness oneself, the mind's activity, which is somewhat endless and relentless in my experience.
Mhm,
The
mhm,
human mind is, it's constantly got, it's like having a radio playing, isn't it? And part
mhm,
of
mhm.
succeeding, I think, as an individual human on this complete confusing and complex planet is that you have to get that mental chatter in check, don't you, and work out when what it's saying is unhelpful, and what you're explaining is a simple cognitive approach to that chatter, and the simple word hold. I think of William Wallace in the film Braveheart when he's running up and down the soldiers, and holding them in place. I think of that, that simple word is would be a strong. I can see that would be very powerful, Warren. That would do it, and I think you'd be hard pushed to find a human being on the planet that hasn't found themselves doing exactly that in a
Self-listening,
conflict
yeah, yes,
situation. Absolutely.
yeah.
Because ultimately what you're talking about is developing trust and faith, isn't it, in each other and in the relationship, to the point where, through these practices, to the point where people feel ultimately close, in all the ways that they need to be close. I wondered, if you would perhaps just explain a little bit about the differences between what you describe as role mate and soulmate in a more general sense, just to give people an idea what's possible. Because I think, again, speaking of my audience and my clients as well, there are a lot of people on the planet that have almost given up entirely on the idea that you can ever actually find fulfillment in relationships, in long-term relationships. So I'd really love to hear from you on that yes, if you could explain the difference between those two things, I wonder if people would find that very helpful.
Well, every couple in a relationship should be a role mate, and but to be a soulmate is an addition. Like we all, my wife and I, we've been together 31 years, and there's 1,000 things that she knows she does better, and I know, and she knows that I do better. And so we pack the trunk, and I have certain things I can do with that, and et cetera. And so those are great roles, and it makes life more efficient. But that would be to be a soulmate is to know that anytime she's upset or I'm upset, that I have a place to bring it up. And I know with 100% certainty she has a method that can lead her to completely hear me. Means I'm not carrying around in me a whole bunch of feelings that I can't express to her. And I feel therefore connected to her. I feel like her soul and my soul are sort of like, they're not one, but they're so supporting and loving and enhancing each other's. And there's so much knowledge that if either one of us are feeling feelings that are upsetting, that we very soon will have a place to share them, and there's no doubt that we'll be heard. That creates a sort of soulmate feeling, and that's really important because if you think about like I ask one of the questions I ask in my workshops is raise your hand if you feel like you at least, even though you're here to improve your communication, and some of you are about ready to get a divorce or break up, that Raise your hand if you nevertheless feel that you communicate at least better than your parents or your grandparents or your great grandparents. And pretty much everybody says yes, that at least they can say about each other, even though they may not like the way they communicate. And so, but yet the divorce level is as much or greater now than it used to be, for your grandparents. And so why is that? And people go, well, gee, I don't know, but this doesn't, it's sort of counterintuitive to think that, we know or we sense that we communicate at least as well as our grandparents, and they've just said that you do. So then why is the divorces greater? We don't feel like, good communication leads to divorces. And the reason is that the expectations have gotten greater and greater. Our grandparents, their job was to survive, and they said, which till death do us part, for better, for worse. And so if things were terrible, the woman went out and talked to her women friends about how terrible they were, and she got that out of her system. The man went and got drunk, or came home late, or stayed at work, or stopped at the bar, or did something, or even got involved with the church because the church would appreciate him or him, or the woman got involved with the church. You try to do things in the community that where you felt you'd be appreciated, rather than do things at home where you weren't appreciated. And so those were the sort of responses we had. But now we want more from each other. If, in the old days, if your husband or wife, women, you were hitting your partner physically or even pushing your partner around, you talk to your women friends or get drunk or, that type of thing about it. And now somebody would say to you, no, that's not acceptable. Get out of that relationship. It's not okay that your partner is hitting you. And so the point there being that our relationships today are more conditional, not less conditional. We want more from our partner. We want the soulmate part of a relationship. Our grandparents only needed the survival part, the role mate part. They didn't require more. But with higher expectations comes greater disappointment if you don't know how to fill the gap between the high expectations and the and what you actually do in your life.
Indeed, and it does mean that we have to actually perhaps more seriously grapple with actually giving what is wanted, and that if I can bring my audience in again, a huge amount of them seem to be in something like stalemate, particularly when it comes to sexual intimacy. So sexual relations, as far as I can gather, things are not good out there, and so a huge amount of my audience, the major complaint is that there has been not enough sexual intimacy, and perhaps the complaints the other way, that people that she doesn't feel that there's enough of an emotional connection, and because of defensiveness, they're not able to actually reconcile these problems. So as you say, there's these perhaps higher expectations. We want to feel seen, we want romance, we want we want to have sexual experiences that are plentiful and fulfilling. So it's quite, whereas as you say, perhaps in the 1930s, I don't know that people had such they didn't have such high hopes for relationships, but we do today. So the task that I have is to try to help couples to kind of work through these problems in communication, and these primal responses, because that's what they are. I mean, it's the base of the brain, isn't it? It's the sort of reptilian part of the brain coming into action, and if we can teach, because I do think a lot of it is psychoeducation. It is teaching people to remain in that pro-social state, remaining open, and keeping cortisol low, low and adrenaline down. You need to be physiologically calm. But what my clients would also say, and my audience would say, is like, that's all great, but if it doesn't result in what I actually want, then all of this stuff is for nothing. So I'm wondering what you have to say on that, Warren. I'm sure my audience would love to hear.
So actually want is two dimensions to that. The most what we almost all actually want more than anything else is just to know that we have a place where we can say whatever we want to say and not risk having somebody argue back with us, interrupt us, send us into, sort of like an internal promise that this was hopeless bringing this up. So we all want that safe space, but historically speaking, and the reason I created the role mate to soulmate work was because I didn't see that happening anywhere in reality after people returned home.
Yes, I love
And
that.
so that's step number one. Once we have that, there's still so once we feel heard, there's much less need to actually change the actual thing. But so we may feel heard that we want to that our partner really wants to go on a vacation to this type of island, and the other person wants to do it in a sort of go hiking on a mountain rather than going to a resort where they're just swimming and
Yeah,
relaxing all day.
yeah.
And so you have these types of differences, and so the first thing we all want is to be heard as to why my difference means so much to me. What happens for me when I relax on a vacation? What happens to me when I hike on a vacation? Then there's another part of the Role Mate to Soulmate book, on one of the other seven secrets, is how to create win-win solutions to our stickiest problems. And so I have and so there and that exercise. Each of us, we sit in a pair, and the one person says one possible solution is this, and then keeps repeating that in a sentence completion exercise, and the other person is taking notes as to every possible solution that their partner comes up with, whether they like it or not. And then the partners reverse, and the other takes notes on the possible solutions, and then they rank how much they like each other's solutions, and then they rank how much they like their own solutions, and then they put them together, and the solution possibilities that have the highest number, they start working on whether or not they can actually make that happen in life. And almost everything has a way of, when people really explore it and with that type of openness, almost always has a win-win solution. There are things that don't, like maybe one person does not want to have children, and another person does want to have children, and one person hates the idea of adopting a child, and et cetera, and the other person wants to adopt a child. So there are things that may lead to a breakup in a relationship because there's something so fundamental there that you'll never agree on. But if you're feeling loved, heard, and seen by your partner, and something as big as children are an issue, having them or not having them, then you balance off, this is a partner that I really feel loved, seen, and heard by. How important is having children to me? And it may be so important that does lead to an amicable breakup. And people with children, it is so crucial. We were talking at the beginning of the show about the Boy Crisis book, and and in the Boy Crisis book, you know that I found that people who experience the boy crisis, the single biggest predictor is a lack of father involvement, or what I call dad deprivation of the boy, leads to the boy crisis. But actually, there's a bigger cause of the boy crisis than dad deprivation, which is poor communication that leads to the couple having tension between them that leads to the divorces, that leads to the dad deprivation, that leads to the boy crisis. So, in a way, the biggest single solution to the boy crisis is this role mate to soulmate method of doing caring and sharing and doing the conflict free zone and learning how to play together and learning how to appreciate each other and learning how to solve your stickiest problems.
Absolutely, Warren, and that's kind of why we're doing what we're doing, because it's just I can't think of anything more meaningful than perhaps having a conversation with fellow human beings about how to warm our marriages and long-term relationships up. So much so that's the environment that the children are experiencing. I honestly don't think that there would be much better that we could offer our kids than that general sense of warmth and, as you say, playfulness and
Mhm.
togetherness. It doesn't need to be perfect because, of course, grown-ups will forever fight. There's always going to be sticky subjects and problems, excuse me, that arise. But for a kid to grow up more or less knowing that mum loves, respects, and enjoys dad, and dad loves and respects and enjoys mum, and the peace that comes from that as an individual, because that's the truth for me. I didn't see that as a kid, and it was the goal of my life. I was almost burning up with the drive to see if it could be done. And I have to say that, having more or less achieved it, the sense of peace as an individual that has come from that, it's I consider it to be the masterpiece of my entire existence, Warren.
Yeah,
Because my
yeah.
little boy, he is okay. He's simply whole. And I can't think of anything better to kind of to well, yes, I can't think of anything better than that.
It really is true. When children sort of see one of the chapters in the book that I have, as you know, is how to create a family dinner night without having becoming a family dinner nightmare, and what the process is of that. And but when children see their parents have a disagreement, and then they see them work it through by really hearing each other like this, it's like, oh, there's a way of doing that. So they get into a fight, an argument with somebody on the playground at school, and they're able to really listen to that other person rather than argue back, and use their intelligence to defeat somebody else. That is what a gift that gives to the children to see an alternative way than what is biologically natural to do to hear somebody else. The only downside of that is that your child ends up becoming the most popular person in school and doesn't have enough time to do their homework, and everybody calls them and says, "Would you listen to me?" I had one
Absolutely.
parent I had one
Absolutely.
parent sort of half jokingly say that once. One of the things that I think developed this role mate to soulmate workshop and book was the that I had after every workshop I do, I have a free group follow up phone call where everybody tells me about 2 months after the workshop what worked, what didn't work, what challenges I have, and so on. And then I work those through with the couple on with the couples that have that on the follow up phone calls, and everybody else is able to hear what other couples are going through as well. And that really educated to me as to what were the mindsets that work the best. What were, how did couples benefit from playing together? What types of music did they love, and so on. And so that's really been very, very helpful. So I want to give credit to all those couples that gave me that feedback.
I can only imagine what a resource that has been, and that's one of the things that I really loved about your book, was that you were very open about that, Warren. That where you could see where you were going wasn't working. I just loved that, the transparency of that. You've been tweaking this thing as you go based on the results, and there's that makes it gives weight to the gold that is contained in not only the book, obviously, but I've no doubt the 8 hours that people would get in terms of the recorded couple work that is available as part of the book. So I wondered, I guess the next, if we could finish, just I'm interested to have people know where they could find you. So would the best thing to be that they buy your book and then they can purchase the workshops that you were explaining? Is that the best place for people to find you, or are there other places too?
The best way is just do warrenfarrell.com. The Warren is like Warren Buffett without the money, and the Farrell is Farrell. Some people think it's like Will Ferrell, but I'm not that funny.
Yes, yes, yes.
And so it's Farrell. Just go warrenfarrell.com, and then on there there's a tab called Couples Communication, and so that'll give you the live workshops that I'm doing. And then also by far and away the easiest way to get the book is just go on Amazon, or if you're that's probably the fastest and easiest way to get it. And fortunately it's on sale now. And so, the book itself is not as important as just in the book is a QR code. And in the book, the access to the online video course is less than half the price that it normally is. And so I really wanted to make that even more available than the book itself, because that's what really changes people's lives. If you can afford to fly over to California and come to, Big Sur, or you want to just come over to the United States and go to one of the live workshops. I just finished the last one this year, and I'm doing the next one in April 10th through 13th. That would be wonderful. I do have a few people come over each workshop from Germany or England or France, and so it's always a pleasure to have those people there.
I imagine that's such a fascinating experience, and quite a large amount of my clients are over in America now. So for some of my clients, it wouldn't be that far, Warren. So hopefully this will spark people's interest, because well, I've no doubt that it will, because there is nothing more painful than the kind of emotional standoff that I see so many people and clients, that place that they get into where it's become so painful to discuss things that they've just, that this huge sort of chasm has opened up between them, and there's nothing, I don't think there's anything more lonely than that. I sometimes wonder if it would actually be less painful to be on your own than to be with someone that you can't reach. I must encourage everybody, if you haven't already looked into Warren Farrell, the great man that is in front of you today, I would encourage you to do so, because it really is a very humbling experience. Warren, you have been working diligently since the 1960s, I believe. Your career, your time on the front lines, doing the things that you've been doing, advocating for men, advocating for boys, advocating for families as well. The heart that you have in terms of trying to help men and women to develop relationships where they feel safe and secure and valued is really, really very humbling and tremendous. My husband told me just before I came online that I think it's at GQ talk about you as one of the most influential thinkers. Yeah, and I said to Russell before, like, oh, I've got to remember to try and say that. So I'm glad that I have. If I've worded it wrong, please, you probably don't want to correct me. I'm sure I'm embarrassing you massively, but when he said that, I thought that's so well earned. And the last thing that I want to say is that everything that you have done has been with a tremendous amount of cultural pushback and, dare I say it, hostility, which makes what you've done and your commitment to these courses the more tremendous still. So really, from the bottom of my heart, certainly, Warren, I really do want to say thank you for everything that you've done, and I've no doubt will continue to do.
Well, thank you. And it comes, you have absorbed it in a way. when Russell made contact with me, Russell, your husband, made contact with me, he represented you in such a loving way. And so the work the two of you have done together has shown, first of all, the fact that he is working on this program with you, and as opposed to just doing his own thing, and he's supporting you in that way. And your warmth and your openness, and you don't pretend to have it all together. You work with couples, and you acknowledge your own evolution and what you're going through. And I think that's such a relief for couples to realize that that the therapist that they're working with is a human being who's been through this, and is working through it, and is open to new stages of development herself. That is so much more life enhancing for people who are working with you than just hearing like some know-it-all that is on the other end that really doesn't know it all, but they delude them into thinking that they do. And so you offer a great deal, and your warmth and openness and vulnerability is really just appreciated by me a great deal.
Thank you, Warren. Thank you for saying that. We're all in it together. As Ram Dass says, we're all just walking each other home. One of my favorite quotes. Thank you so much for joining me today, Warren. It has been a tremendous pleasure and privilege.
Thank you, and for me too. It's really been a real pleasure.